Hi everyone, welcome. As you can see, I've got my yellow buckets out here on the bench already. My buckets with the European night crawlers living in them. We are now at day 264. 2 weeks ago, 14 days ago, we celebrated the system's 250th day in service, at which time they got their 19th feeding, and we questioned, is there going to be a 20th feeding? Would we just call that previous feeding the 19th its last, and say that from that point on they're just foraging? Well, I don't know, I wasn't quite sure I was ready for that, and I figured, you know what, a nice round number like 20, let's just keep going. Why don't we give these guys their 20th feeding at this point, and then maybe we'll consider, you know, what it'll take to get the wormies out and get them working in some new space. At one point in time, we were covering things. We had these nice custom-made pieces of cardboard made to fit perfectly in here, but you could see what happened. There was a huge amount of moisture, so much so that it was starting to soak up into the top covering. So we decided to leave off the coverings. And not only that, we started transitioning to a very dry food only diet. So coffee, not surprisingly, is one of the main things. And this worm chow that I've started developing recently is also part of it. And this is pretty much all they've been getting now for quite a few feedings. Perhaps the third feeding now, or fourth. And I believe we had even started observing in the last check-in how the consistency of the bin, at least in bin number 2, or bucket number 2, was really beginning to look like it had sort of dried off to that point where it was about right, you know, flowing material, not too clumpy from being too damp. This is something I don't remember seeing in here before either. Considering we've given them only worm chow recently, I would have to guess that I'm not doing a good enough job breaking up all the seeds. Because it looks like some of the stuff that's been given to them as food has actually germinated and turned into little seedlings here, which can almost immediately be transitioned into food for them. Now, this had been what we were covering up with each time to show ourselves where we were feeding, because we kept switching the sides from side to side. So we had last fed on this side, and what remains of this coffee filter is meant to show that. I had submerged a good part of this coffee filter under the surface, just in case they were in need of something other than the worm chow and the coffee, in case they needed something more of a carbon heavy food item. I just figured let's put that out there for them. But we did see good amounts of leftover scraps of bedding and little bits of leaves and paper or whatever. So I'm sure there's still plenty of carbon-based food floating around in these systems for them if they need it. So before we feed, which will now be on that side, we always like to see how the previous feeding did. And we don't come in here expecting to see any leftovers because it's, you know, worm chow and coffee, stuff that you're not going to see any leftovers of, I don't think. I mean, if there was a big, huge mound of coffee, then that might have leftovers. Maybe they would be able to just nibble the outer exposed portion of it, but the middle portion of the lump of coffee would remain uneaten. But we usually sprinkle it around to give all the food a fair chance at being accessed by the wormies. Castings are really nice, but I'm always really curious to see what kind of leftovers linger within the material. Perhaps this was just a really large piece of paper and this is what it's now in terms of size. So that's the only reason I think I'm seeing something fairly good in size, is because it might have already been fairly large when it first started getting broken down. But man, this is so nice. So much nice castings all throughout here. Every now and then I hit something, I don't know what it is, but it does manage to break apart when I press on it, but I have to press hard. So we're going to continue using this fairly weathered, but still somewhat intact coffee filter as the indicator to show where we last fed. And the feeding's going to go once again, as we've been doing, onto the opposite side. And at feeding number 20, I am really starting to think that this is going to be the last. Between the previous feeding and now, I had taken this little poll in the community tab of my channel, asking viewers what they thought about these little different storylines that we've got going on. So obviously, these 3 buckets here are not 3 separate storylines. They're just a single storyline. And this is one of the least popular storylines, it seems. I think most people are just most interested in it from the perspective that each of these systems were started with a very small number of worms. And how, you know, as you look in here now, you can really sense that there is a decent number of worms in each of these buckets. That's not how we started, that's for sure. I'm going to come in with first the lighter colored worm chow, because that'll permit me to more easily see how much coffee I've added. There again, I really want to try to, you know, divvy up the coffee evenly 3 ways. It's a little bit difficult with this method of dispensing it. So I just have to pour out a little bit and just look back at how much is remaining and try to judge it that way. I'm guessing that these worms probably like these feedings. I don't know. It's all bite-sized stuff. It's kind of blended together so it's not too mundane and boring. The coffee combined with all the different things that make up the worm chow has got to be something that the worms really enjoy. So let me just top this off with just a little bit more of the worm chow. Because, you know, it does feel like 2 weeks between feedings and this is all they're getting, then it certainly don't seem like much. That's when you really have to trust that all those remaining little bits of stuff floating around within the material is going to be suitable for keeping them going. And it must be, otherwise it would all be gone by now, right? So somewhere between what we're giving them and what still remains as leftovers from previous check-ins, they're seemingly doing pretty good. I guess, whatever, I'm not even sure if it's all that important, but like we did last time, we're going to submerge the better portion of this feeding zone indicator to make sure that it remains nice and damp by being beneath the surface. And this way, if the worms need to nibble on that a little bit, they can do so. All I want is enough to see that it's there, so when we come back the next time, we know where we last fed. Not that it would be so difficult to figure that out either. All right, on to bucket number 2. Okay. Oops, sorry. I must admit, I thought that more of these... Okay, well, that might be more like what I was expecting. I thought that more of the coffee filter would get consumed by the worms, and in this case it does seem like that's just what happened. I wonder if enough of this will remain for us to see where we last fed. There again, I think I sometimes overstate the need or importance of the feeding zone indicator. It's just kind of like a little fun thing, I think. So here again, just mow down the stuff that's trying to grow in here, presumably because of something in the worm chow. What else could it be? After all this time, I don't recall seeing stuff like this growing down here within this system. This thing is so small, it feels like it's just going to blend in and we're going to lose it. There's a little scrap of it. Oh, brother. Things look really nice. Lots of nice castings, and I do here and there still see a little chunk of paper or maybe a piece of a leaf or little stuff that, you know, I don't know if you can count it as bedding anymore, because, you know, bedding to me just seems like something the worms can actually live in and, you know, nestle in. At this point, it's certainly just been broken down to a little scrap of food, a more carbon-rich food item to offset the kitchen scrap type feeding, which is more nitrogen rich. I guess all these little things we uprooted, we can just kind of bury them too and let the worms have at that stuff as well as like a little extra bonus snack. not really treating that as part of our feeding, so it's not important to me where that lands. I don't know. Are there more worms on this side, or were there more on the other side where the feeding last was? I mean, that last feeding was probably history a long time ago, so it's probably got very little impact on where the worms are going to be located now 2 weeks later. Yeah, I thought I'd be a nice guy and I'd wait for all the worms to submerge, but these two guys, they just want to cruise the surface. They're not diving down anytime soon, so I'm not waiting for them. We're going to drop in their food. Again, I'm going to try to be fair and apply the same amount to each system. Oops, okay. Maybe just a little bit more of the coffee can go here. And then it's all clumped together. I keep thinking it's going to come out in one big mass. That's a pretty good bit of coffee. Oops. Spice it up with just a little bit more of this worm chow. And now they can dig in. Bon appetit, wormies. Got some stuff in here like this stick is never going to break down. I think I remember snapping this in half a couple check-ins ago and then remembering after the fact how maybe it would have been a good chance to remove it at that point. So I'm going to try to leave a little piece of paper sticking out over here just to show ourselves where we submerged our feeding zone indicator, and hopefully they find it helpful to have a little bit of extra paper down within the material. But here too, I think I'm just finding chunks of paper, in this case somewhat stuck together, clumped together. I'm just breaking them apart a little bit, and then we'll see if we could submerge those too. I gotta say, while last week this was the only systems that seemed to be flowing and crumbly enough for my liking, the other two seemed like they needed a little bit more drying, so that's the reason we kept keeping them uncovered. But maybe it's time to think about putting those cardboard coverings back on. On to bucket number 3. Ooh. Here we go. Yeah, despite being very, very highly concentrated with beautiful castings, it's also clear that it's full of this and that as well. So if you really wanted some nice, clean castings out of here, you'd either have to wait an extremely long time for stuff like this to break down. It's like the shell of I think I called it the shell of a mango last time, but I think it's really the mango seeds husk. So it didn't sound right when I listened to the video. So let's see here. This is what I'm curious of. Yeah, there you go. Still there the way we left it for them. 2 or 3 worms on it, taking advantage of it, nibbling on it, but it doesn't seem like it's that important, you know. It's kind of a courtesy thing, you know. It's not life or death. Here too, the surface material was a little bit dry, but as soon as you start digging down a little tiny bit, you can feel nice and cool, damp material everywhere. I've got a feeling if this material was spread out in like one of my regular shallow bus trays, bus boxes, bus bins, whatever they're called, there I think that the material would dry out quite a bit quicker because of it having that much more, I guess maybe less wall around it and maybe more movement of air across the top of it. So that's just my guess. I just have this feeling that being in a bucket this way with all this wall around you to prevent airflow, or limit it, I would say, probably results in a good amount of moisture being retained by the system. But we're now over to bucket number 3. get these little guys fed and we'll be all set. Okay. Just every now and then I bump into a little something, and if it doesn't crumble, I assume it's a leftover, and when I can't identify it, makes me wonder, what is it that I have in my hands? A lot of it's really obvious. There's a good bit of it here and there too, so that'll keep them happy. All right, let's let these little guys chill out a little bit, and then we'll drop in their food. Well, you know, based on what I've seen here today, I think all 3 bins are now at a stage where the material has got the perfect moisture level. Let's give them the rest of this coffee. It might be a bit more than the other systems received, but that's fine. What we're adding here, you know, this coffee, you can see it is damp, you know, as used coffee would be, unless you left it out for quite a long time to dry. But I don't treat that as a contribution of the system's moisture. If we were to put something like watermelon in here, or something that we know is going to emit a whole bunch of moisture as it thaws out after being frozen or just in the breakdown process, I would treat that as a feeding that does contribute moisture to the system. But I don't think that what we're giving them here is going to be doing that. So I am going to bring the coverings back, I believe, at this point on all 3 systems. It seems like the right thing to do at this point. If I wanted to run this stuff through a screen, it would all perfectly flow, every last bit of it. There's really nothing in here that's clumping. There's no pockets of excess moisture. We've been pretty thorough too, you know. We've examined both sides of the bin, the previous feeding area, good excavation of where we applied the food today. Everything looks pretty much consistent through and through. So I believe I'm going to be putting these cardboard coverings back on after I'm done here. But other than that, we're done. Very nice. So I'm inclined to make this quite possibly into the final feeding. We teased and hinted at it last time. We talked about it as maybe being the last feeding, but I'm really getting that feeling at this point, based on some feedback I got in the community tab of my YouTube channel. If you have not been there yet, I invite you to go check it out. I kind of laid out a little poll asking people about my different storylines, this being one of them, and I think that this was one of the least favorite storylines. So you know, I think once it's gone, it's not going to be too missed. Although I think most people are interested in just the general topic of starting systems like this with small numbers of worms to see what becomes of it. And as you can see, each of these systems has a good number of worms in it. So I think from that perspective, it was an interesting story to tell. But the story is more or less over at this point. But what remains here is still going to be the matter of getting the worms out, getting them relocated, cleaning up their castings, putting that stuff in storage, blah, blah, blah. So there's work to be done here still. We're not done, but I got a feeling we'll be done with it soon. Maybe in the next few check-ins. All right, everyone, that's it for today. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. If you did, as always, please don't forget to leave me a quick thumbs up before you go. That's always very much appreciated. And if you haven't done so already, please also consider subscribing to the channel. That's very much appreciated as well. All right, everyone, have a great day. Thanks again for watching. Bye-bye.